Afternoon everyone. I'm Jane Rogan and I'm the Business Manager for the MCRC Biobank. Just by way of introduction, just to talk about how we were founded. We've actually been established for quite a long time now, since 2007. The driver for it really was that there was a lot of disorganised sample collection within Manchester, especially around cancer. So in 2007, we set up a working group to try and work out how we could make that easier, and it was decided that we'd set up a biobank. So the MCRC was set up as a partnership. So the biobank is a partnership between the Christie, MCRC and CIUK, who's now our main funder. And it was really about organising sample collection across the region, really focusing on surgical cases from patients going for cancer surgery, and for the sample collections to be facilitated for cancer research. And the drivers for that were really around governance and legislation. So the Human Tissue Act had recently come in. To collect samples of good sample quality, we had history of samples being collected from theatres, but actually with long ischemia times or no ischemia times recorded. And then we also needed to close the loop and make sure the access to those samples was efficient. So that was really the drivers around setting up the MCRC Biobank. So how we're structured is through the Christie Research and Innovation Division. So we sit within the Innovation Division of the Trust, and that's the core sample collection team, our informatics infrastructure. So all of our data sits on the Christie servers, and the governance for the MCRC Biobank sits within the Christie as well. So we have a HTA licence and MDI on that for the Trust, as well as the Biobank, and our ethics sits under the Christie as well. But we also partner from an operational perspective with the CIUK Manchester Institute. So they've always historically been the physical home of the biobank up until the Patterson suffered a fire in 2017. And we work closely with the histology core facility. So they make our FFP blocks, they cut our sections, and they can build our TMAs as well. So they're a research core facility that support the biobanking activity. So we were set up as a pan-Manchester biobank. As I mentioned, we were set up originally as a surgical biobank. So to make sure we could collect samples from different specialties, we had to have a presence across Greater Manchester. So this just demonstrates some of the hospitals that we collect from. I would just point out at the moment that some of the collections have been paused due to COVID. But at the moment we are collecting from the Christie and from Wythenshawe Hospital as well. So we have been able to restart some of our activity, but we haven't actually been able to restart at Salford Central or at Pennine. So we are running a reduced service presently, but we have been able to continue a lot of our research programmes running out of the Christie, which has been good in light of the situation this year. So in terms of what we have stored in the biobank, so obviously because we've been going for such a long time, we have been able to build up a comprehensive biobank across most tumour types. And I would say we have a large biobank across the common tumour types. Something else that we can offer as well is linked clinical data. One of the advantages for us of having a presence at each of the trusts across Manchester is that we can link in to the different clinical databases. I think people are aware of how difficult it is to collect good quality clinical data, and actually most trusts are working on different systems and the data isn't linked. So even though it is a manual process, we are able to access patient level data at different hospitals and pull that in and link that to the samples that we collect as well. So just as an overview of what we have banked, so we've recruited nearly 20,000 patients, and we have donations from around 17,000 patients. I think what's important to point out is even though for some patients we have a consent and no sample, we can access and link that consent to a sample in the pathology archive for all of the patients we have recruited. So we have the ability to pull samples in from patients that have been consented to the biobank. The biobank operates two arms. So we have the solid tumour arm, which is the bulk of our activity. So that's collecting FFP, tumour and normal. Same for frozen, and then blood, so serum, plasma and whole blood. So that's the majority of what we have banked. And then for the hematological malignancy arm, we collect and process blood and bone marrow, and that's cryopreserved. So we store viable cells, and we also store plasma and FFP tissue from trifine biopsies as well. So they all fall under the same ethical infrastructure, but they are operated slightly differently. But in terms of access, you access through the same route for both arms of the biobank. And one thing to kind of go into in a bit more detail is how we manage our biobanking strategy. So we realised quite early on that research needs to drive the sample collection, not the other way around. So As well as collecting and building up a biobank in common tumours, we realised that we needed to think about our strategy to meet researchers' needs within the region and beyond. So we now very much focus our biobanking activity on rare tumours or rare subtypes of common tumours, or what's not on here is tumours that may be more common but are quite difficult to collect. So where we don't have a large collection in some more common tumours, we will carry on banking those. But the rest of our activity is very much focused on prospective collection. So one thing that we did quite early on was facilitate prospective collection of fresh tissue. We can also do that for fluids as well. So we routinely collect acidic fluid and pleural fluid. And this supports work in culture and work with animal models as well, where we have to deliver fresh tissue or fresh fluids directly to the researcher at the point of collection. We can also support and facilitate bespoke collections. So that might be serial blood collections and oncology clinics. They're normally in collaboration with the oncologist, the medical oncologist mainly, to support collection of these samples in a variety of disease areas, but mainly driven through the Christie. And one thing we've done over recent years is support secondary biobanking activity. So this might be where researchers want support for sample collection that maps along the biobanking collection pathways. So it would make sense for our staff to also carry out that sample collection activity. Or it might be temporary storage of samples or collation of samples before they're shipped for analysis. So we have a separate application process for that. So in terms of our access, it works in a very similar way to the other biobanks in Manchester, in that we have a research tissue bank ethics approval, and that's a generic ethics approval which can confer ethics approval to users of samples. There's no need to go and get a separate ethics approval, HRA approval, or anything like that. So it's a streamlined application process. We can accept applications for bank samples or prospective collection projects. We do like researchers to come and speak to us about what they need. That then feeds into the application, which would be filled out. So that's normally after a discussion about what samples we either have stored or what we can collect prospectively. And then in terms of our pricing structure, it's competitive. So we only charge full economic costing for commercial work. The rest is subsidised. We're co-funded by CI UK. And we can provide price lists which are available on request depending on the type of work that's required. And just to go into a bit of detail about our application process. So we have two routes of application. We have a full research application, which has to be reviewed scientifically to justify release of samples. That's then ratified by an access subgroup, and we aim to have a decision within 30 working days. If people want a few samples just to do some QC or method development work, we have a different application form for that, and that is just reviewed internally. And we normally get a decision back on that within 10 working days. So quite often researchers use that as a precursor to a full research application, which is also quite useful. So we have those two routes of access. And then like the other biobanks, once the application is complete and we approve that, then there's an MTA to sign before samples are released. So in terms of accessing and who to contact, in the first instance, it's either myself or Shahzad, who's our biobank coordinator. If you could just contact us by email, then we can start those discussions about what samples you might need. And then we also have a website as well with just a bit more information, and that is being revamped in the new year as well. So there will be more information on there about how to access the biobank and the samples we might have available. Thank you.